Hello, everybody. What a beautiful day to be discussing the only political theory worth knowing about, Horseshoe Theory. And the TLDR version of this one is that you go further left or right along any of these systems, you're going to end up at the same place. And of course, it's easy enough to say, and a lot of people have been saying it, and a lot of people get laughed out of the room for saying it, but I'm going to explain it to you based on the sliding scale that we sort of have in our modern political theory from left to right, and how this applies to you. So anyway, on the far left of modern political theory that we have today is the Marxist communism. And the idea behind this is that nobody owns anything, everything is shared, and everything is just puts forward to provide the best, greatest good for human beings, for society in general. And this is a fantasy. This has never happened. And even communists will tell you that true communism has never been tried. It's like, well, yes, because it's a fantasy. I think that it's easy to see, like, when this has tried, if there's no government there, because that's the idea, that there is no government, it's just everything is shared among people and everyone just does what they're supposed to do without being told what to do. If there's no government there to enforce this, it just takes one malicious actor to ruin the whole system for everyone, and it will quickly devolve into whoever's the biggest, toughest guy in the city, whoever's the biggest, toughest guy in the town will just take over because there's no one there to stop him. And so that's why that this style of government slips very, very quickly into the style that is the second furthest to the left, authoritarian socialism. Now, this is a system that actually is stable. This is a system that actually does exist in the real world. Some examples have been in the past, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Today, the CCP China and North Korea are examples of authoritarian socialism. And the idea behind this is that they still believe in the Marxist theory of nobody owning no private property, no one owns anything, and instead everything is put forward to the good of the greater, for the greater project, whatever it happens to be, whether it's for the to build China strong, or the global communist, the global Comintern, or in Nazi Germany's case, the greater good for the German race. Whatever, ideology is secondary. Ideology, anything, people will come up with any sort of ideology to defend what sort of system brings them power. So if they are being brought power by authoritarian socialism, they going to want to keep their place in authoritarian socialism. So they'll make up whatever bullshit to feed the people to keep them up there. And that can come in the form of racism. That can come in, often does. It often comes in the form of racism. It's a very effective one. Especially in these socialist systems where religion is removed. They see religion as sort of the enemy, because if you believe that there is a God up there that dictates where you are in life and your path forward in destiny, that is antithetical to the Marxist socialist belief that it is human beings, it is us down here on earth that through our own human intellect and human will that can bend nature to our will and can create a greater tomorrow for our kids or whatever. If you believe that you have been given a fate and your place is locked in fate and there's nothing you can do about it and the structure exists because it exists, then that is the opposite of what the authoritarian socialists believe. And this is why in many of these places religion is banned. For example, in China, Soviet Russia, and in North Korea, where basically the only religion they have is to support the dear leader. But so as I stated, because it is basically impossible and impractical to completely outrule private property, especially, even to just expect that people are going to share everything without being coerced into doing so, authoritarian socialism allows the bare minimum of personal property. That's basically just personal items or consumer goods. Like, you're allowed to go to the shop and buy candy. You're allowed to go to the shop and buy new shoes, if you're lucky. But I guess it depends on the sort of control. There may be a system where the government does ration clothing, but there may be a system, for example, in modern China, where clothing is considered a consumer good. Where But however, all of the factories, all of the means of production, all of the farms, and even the internet in these places is owned by the government. So any capital that can be used to create greater value is owned solely by the government. And you're allowed to have your little trinkets and you're allowed to have your pictures on the wall or whatever. You can call that yours. You can even own an expensive car in modern China. You can own an expensive car, but you can never own land. You can buy an apartment for 1 million yuan, and you are just renting that apartment from the government. You will never own a business in China. You can only start a business if you're a member of the Chinese Communist Party, and that business is only able to continue to run as long as it continually serves the Communist Party. They say this is a sort of an idea of state capitalism, where they have sort of a capitalist system where goods can be bought and sold within the state. However, every single transaction, every single means of production of capital in that state is owned by the state, and it's there to serve the state. This is sort of the first system from going from left to right where there is a system of capital exchange. This is the most, if I remember, communist Marxism, there's no private property, there's no capital exchange, there's no markets. Now, in this authoritarian socialism, there may, depending on how further to the left or right you go, emerge a system of state capitalism where there is a market, where there is sort of a quasi-free market where goods and services can be traded, but once again, all within the over-encompassing system of the state, and only by permission of the state. Now, as we go further to the right, still to the left of the average, this is it's sort of around the center, really. This is where we have democratic socialism, and this is sort of a system that we see for the most part here in Australia, but also in many other Western countries, European Western countries. Canada is another great example of this, where a system of capitalism and a system of socialism, they coexist. This is a great lie that people tell you, that these cultural warriors will tell you that it's impossible for socialism and capitalism to coexist. Actually, that is complete bullshit, because it has actually coexisted for quite a long time here in this country and in many other countries around the world. The idea behind democratic socialism is that there are some goods and services that are controlled by the government and by the state, and there are other goods and services that are left up to free capital markets. And it is up to the people within this system to vote and decide through free elections where different services should be provided. So, for example, in Australia, we have two systems of healthcare. There's a free socialist healthcare system, which is run by the state and funded through by taxes, and very popular with voters here. So obviously, it keeps getting supported in that sense. But there's also a private health system where if you've got enough money and you don't want to go to the public health system for whatever reason, I mean, I've done it my whole life, and it's actually pretty good, the public health system. But if you do have the choice to pay extra money to go see your private quack, and he can, rub his piss on your arm to cure COVID, if that's what you're about, yeah, you have the freedom to do that. And it comes to many things as well. Like, I know, for example, in Australia here, we used to have public. The telephone company was publicly owned. Now, ever since that got privatized in the 80s, it's been a bit of a fucking joke. But for example, in a system of democratic socialism, if the people were to vote at the ballot that they wanted a certain service or a certain sector to become property of the public good, then they would vote for a government to do that, and that will make it happen. But a big part about democratic socialism is that if the Socialist Party, within this democratic system loses, then they will give up power freely to the next person who's coming in. This is something that there's no elections in the authoritarian socialism system. There's none of that. Like, there's no giving up power to those other guys because they won this time. It's unheard of. So in this system, it's a compromise between the powers that be, the powers of capital that want to have a free, more capitalist system, and the socialist technocrats, the socialist meritocrats, who believe that they through their own greater intellect, know what's best for you. And honestly, I think that this is the best system which should be aimed for. If anything, Australia has moved further away from this system to the right in recent years. And it's been at the detriment of this country because services like the telephone company that used to be publicly owned and now gone down the fucking drain thanks to privatization. And when our Labour Party tried to introduce a socialist internet, the National Broadband Network, for everyone in Australia, by the time it actually gets implemented, because when the Liberal Party gets in charge, by the time it actually gets implemented, it's hopeless. It's a fucking joke, once again, because it's been privatized. And rather than having all of the effort and money being put in to make the best internet system that we can have, instead you got to think about the shareholders, and you got to think about the competition, like competing with other internet companies, and then that becomes this whole other thing, rather than just trying to do the best goddamn job. And this is where you get to further to the right now. There's an area of liberalism. And it's not to be confused with this sort of idea of social liberalism, which you have in America, which is basically what the word is being used for, because we're not talking about social issues here. But economic liberalism is the idea that everyone has the right that the government should not interfere with private property. The government should not interfere with your right to have private property or trade it however way you want. Now, we saw in democratic socialism, you have like two parallel systems, both with equal power, that you can vote for if you want this system to run things or this system to run things. Within the system of liberalism, the system of capital is the overarching system, the architecture that everything runs through. And the government, the socialist welfare state, whatever it happens to be, is just one of many competing interests within this greater system. So in a liberal economic system, you may have a government that's building roads, and you may have a government that has a healthcare system, but it will be competing with other private interests that there's no rule against them competing. There will be private companies building roads, and there'll be private companies building hospitals, and there'll be private companies doing everything the government can do, and their argument is that we can do it better than them. And in a sense, they will crowd out the government. It will make the government completely inefficient and ineffective at running these things, because they have to consider these things, just like the Australian National Broadband Network, things like the shareholders and things like the competition. And you'll even see, like in liberal economic systems, if a government tries to do something, some sort of project that infringes on the capital rights of the powers that be, the capital that be, then they will be sued, because the government is not above these other companies within its own system. They will be sued and very often will lose them. And so you see in systems like this where companies that are already in power will continue to stay in power, and they will actually stifle innovation and creativity, because their interest is not in advancing, not in creating a better world for everyone, like our socialist government may be, theoretically. Like a socialist government theoretically may want to advance society. But instead, they just want to continue making the most amount of money possible for themselves and for their shareholders. And so if the government comes in, for example, in Australia, to lay down a national broadband network that will put them all out of business, they will fight tooth and nail to prevent that from happening. And because in this system, the government is not any more powerful, than it is just one of many competing interests within this liberal system, they will probably lose, and we get what we get, and it be what it be. And further to the right, now this is where basically society is heading right now, unless anyone stops this. This comes by many names. Neo-Liberalism is what you've heard. Libertarianism, laissez-faire capitalism is what it has been called in the past. Feudalism is a name that it goes by that you may have heard. And basically, at this point, the government no longer cares if you live or die. It only exists to defend national borders and enforce property rights. That is the only reason why the government exists now. There is no more, like in liberalism, at least the government will stop you from starving, and it will stop you from dying in the streets. Like, it will do the bare minimum to keep you alive. Now, under neoliberalism, under libertarianism, the government doesn't even do that. They really don't give a fuck. They only exist to enforce the property rights of people with property, i.e. the rich. They don't give a fuck about you. Now, this is what we sort of got with the Gilded Age. This is what we're going into now, where basically the government, they don't do anything. They don't own anything. In fact, they're seen as virtuous to step back and do as little as possible and let the people with power fight amongst themselves. And so that would be in this day, the sort of the tech companies, the tech oligarchs, Silicon Valley, as well as the mining companies here in Australia. But whichever capital, just there's the interests of capital, is what is able to have free reign over our entire society with in fact the government helps this. The government will try to stop anyone that gets in the way of this. And like in the late 19th century, this happened with the robber barons, with the Carnegies and the Rockefellers. This is what society looked like in medieval Europe before the Renaissance, before the Enlightenment, where basically you exchange capital, but like instead of having industrialists, it was the nobility, the landed elite that owned the farms for no reason. They just did. And this is on the right here. When we're talking about the left, how they were anti-religion, often the right is pro-religion, because you see, if there is someone that's in charge of a bunch of stuff, and there's no physical reason, like why should this guy be in charge? Oh, because of God, because of fate, because I just did the best thing to get here. And that was like basically how feudalism ran, but it's been exchanged for this idea of meritocracy in the liberal era, where because most people, you can't get away with saying because God put me here. Now you say it's because I worked the hardest, I hustled the hardest. Meritocracy, it's like through the good of my own will, my own good fortune that made me to the top of here. Like, fucking like just the Gary V mindset, right? Like, you think Jeff Bezos got to the top by being a good person? Well, well. If you truly believe that, then you got a lot more learning to do before you can get to this video, I tell you that. But anyway, so yes, basically this system of neoliberalism is indistinguishable from feudalism. It's just feudalism with computers, because it's the same bullshit. It's that the people with capital continue to own the capital, and you have the right to use that to make them money, but basically nothing for you. They don't give a fuck about you. You can make money for them, or you can die in a hole, and that is society, and the government will do nothing to stop it, because the government only exists to enforce what is going on here. And because, this is for the most part a stable system, as long as the government at least tries to like stop anti-monopolies from forming. Because remember, if one of these capital elite or one of these landed elite in the past became too powerful, more powerful than the overarching governing control, they would just take control. And sometimes that would happen, and you get into absolutism, far-right absolutism, far-right totalitarianism, whatever it may be, whatever it may look like. But it's basically, there's just one guy in charge of everything, controls everything from the top down. And what do you know? Oh, look, that looks exactly like we were at the left, wasn't it? Basically, you might have had a different reason to get there. They might have had a different ideology of how they got there to this system where one guy owns everything, nobody else owns anything. And basically, you're only allowed to exist on his beck and call. There may be different ideologies that brought us here, but we are here nonetheless. And this is the idea of Horseshoe Theory, you see, that there's a constant pull left and right within our culture to go like, oh, the Marxists want to bring us left and the capitalists want to bring us right. But I would argue that every single one of these systems from left to right is a capitalist system, because it puts capital at the heart of what it means to be. Basically, it's just different theories about how to distribute this capital, but it's still, all of them are capitalist systems. Even the far left authoritarian socialism, it's about control of capital. It's about control of the means of productions by a government whose the ideology of the government is to control this for the good of the people, for the greater good. Whereas on the far right, it's the same thing. It's a control of capital by whoever the powers it be, but the ideology behind that is, I'm sure they believe that it's for the greater good. Otherwise, like, they have to justify themselves being there somehow. In reality, well, we're most familiar with the tyranny of the right here in our modern liberal world. In reality, it turns out to be for them to serve themselves and keep themselves in power. Same with that on the left. Like, they may believe that they're in power to bring the greater good to the everyday people, but if you look at the systems of North Korea and China today, it's very hard to believe that that's actually what's going on there. And you see, Marx's theory was that there was sort of like a leftward movement of history. You see, we had the feudalists of the right, the totalitarian, the like kings and absolutists of the right, and as we evolved, society pushed further and further left, and that's where we went from feudalism to liberal capitalism to democratic socialism. And his idea was that capitalism was an inevitable stopping point on the road of technology from feudalism. We needed to be at capitalism and liberalism, so then the working class could get like slightly more power than they had under feudalism, like power to run their own affairs, and then they would, through the pressure of what they wanted, or through the pressure of their demanding needs, would push society further and further left to, like, through socialism and then to the Marxist utopia that we discussed at the start of the video. And it's very easy to hate on Marx for this idea, right? It's very easy to be like, oh, what a fucking idiot. Didn't he realize that this was just going to lead right back around to the start? But you got to remember that this guy was alive, 300 years ago, and he was saying stuff that's still relevant to us today. And at least he had ideas to be wrong about. I'll tell to any of the Marx critics out there, like, I mean, the man had ideas. What have you got, you know? So yeah, at least he had some ideas to be wrong about. Give the man a break. It's just like when they said, like, oh yeah, you know, like Freud was wrong about so many things, and he was like, at least he had things to be wrong about. So that's anyway the Marxist theory of leftward movement of history. However, I believe that we don't have. If you go far enough left, you end up back in the right, and we end up just running around this circle, running around this ring for eternity. You see that all systems, no matter where you stop, even from far left to the democratic socialism to capitalism to libertarianism and feudalism on the right, no matter where you stop, is the possibility for corruption at every single step along the way. The corruption looks different and it takes different forms, but basically at every stop along the way, there are certain groups of people that have interest in keeping things stuck a certain way because it brings them power. And the only way to break this cycle is not by going left or right, because you'll just have a different group of people in power that have different vested interests, however, vested interests that are bad in a different way. What we need to do is we need to transcend upwards along a different axis. So, like, even in the past, if you had people's republics back in ancient Europe, you had people's republics back then, you had monarchies back then. Some of them were good, some of them were bad. And through history, as you evolve, we've had socialist governments. Some of them have been good, some of them have been bad. We've had capitalist governments. Some of them have been good, some of them have been bad. And at the end of the day, it's not about trying to pick one of these systems which is going to be the best, but it's about what can be done within the system that currently happens. And at what point in time, there will be points in time when it makes sense for a certain government to evolve. So, for example, after the Great Recession of the 70s, it made sense at that point in time for the system to evolve. It needed to be liberalized. We needed to go further to the right to allow capital to accumulate, because that was the problem of the time was a lack of liquidity, a lack of capital. That meant that people weren't able to buy food or goods, essentials that they needed. And so a shift with right was what was necessary at that point in time. We've reached another point in time, another peak point of crisis where we need to have a change. Perhaps it's a shift with left, perhaps it's a shift with so far right that we come back around the other side. But either way, either direction you move, wherever we stay right now is not going to hold water for the perceivable future. However, it's important to note that whether you move left or right along this system, it's not going to get us out of the cycle. The only way to get out is upwards, and that comes through a greater class consciousness, and that comes through people studying and learning things like this, people learning their political theory and people learning their economic theory. And at the end of the day, your only way you have power in this system is through your attention. Attention is the last scarce resource, because as we create machines to create everything else for us, food, goods, clothing, whatever, attention is the last thing that people and only people can give. And when you put your attention towards learning political theory, and you put your attention towards what's going on in the world and what's going on in the news, and you put your attention towards political figures that you believe have the ideas to help us out in this system, then that is when progress can be made. When you put your attention towards blindly picking a political ideology because that's just your team and you need your team to win so that you get some sort of validation, that is when your attention is actually leached. It is wasted because it's going towards building these fantasies, this Marxist, capitalist, whatever the fuck you want to believe in, this fantasy that just believing this ideology, and if we get everyone else to believe in this ideology, we're going to fix the world's problems. That's a fantasy. But when you put your attention towards tangible, like fixable problems within your area of influence, and when you put your attention towards that, that's where change happens. It happens with one action at a time, at one real action at a time. And that is what is required to continue the progress forward and from getting us out of this rut that we're into. So be wise with your attention, people. Don't waste it, and don't give it away to people that just want to abuse it for their own power. That's all for now. We'll expand on this later.